back and forth as we're looking right now. The 1 o'clock advisory, 110, and it is moving north-northeast at 8. That turn to the north-northeast was really significant because before it was heading north-northwest for a while, then north. Now we're starting to see more of that turn, which is in line with our forecast that we've been talking about for quite a while. I wanted to get Tim's thoughts. And Tim, I don't know if you can come on over. This is Facebook. This is very casual here. So, we're not as structured as we normally would be during a broadcast, obviously. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Tim, on the severe weather threat. I thought it was interesting. We were talking about this earlier. They kept expanding that watch area, and then taking a look at the Storm Prediction Center's outlook for severe weather. Very interesting. Yesterday and the day before, they were really downplaying the threat of tornadoes so much with this because it looked like the structure was going to be a little different. Those bands came on, and all of a sudden we started seeing tornadoes like crazy down in southern North Carolina.
Right. We almost saw this exact same setup with Florence last year. We had 12-hour watch boxes put out, and there were tornadoes spinning up in all parts of coastal North Carolina, just because the overall setup in the atmosphere is much easier to spin up a waterspout that moves on land. Generally, these are weak and short-lived, but they caused a lot of damage out through Wilmington.
And it's significant to note, when these things come in, you get a band that's coming in, and that band rolls over the ground, and that friction will create these little eddies or these little spin-ups. So they're very common. You typically don't have much warning on them. You'll see them pop up. They'll issue a warning, and they may be gone very, very quickly.
Right. Debbie is asking here on Facebook Live, how strong will these possible tornadoes be? I think you might have just answered that question, but they're also rain-wrapped too, right?
Right. A lot of times it's hard to see them coming, especially at night. I'm not going to have any light out there. But typically EF1, maybe EF2. Some of them, though, is off to the south, did cause a lot of damage.
Yeah. We mentioned, I believe Rochelle put together an outlook with the severe weather threat. This is the outlook for today. Now, earlier, when I first was in this morning on daybreak, it was just a little sliver right along the coast that was in a marginal and then a slight kind of a category or tier 1 and 2 outlook. What has happened is during the morning hours, as we went towards noon, they took a bigger chunk when we started seeing these tornadoes spinning up. They expanded it, and now you can see that third tier, that enhanced threat, reaching just about up to the Virginia state line, Currituck, Camden, Pasquotank, Perquimans, those counties down to the south. Rochelle, you put that graphic together. You had a chance to take a look at this. With these spin-up tornadoes, you've got to be ready to react pretty quickly.
Exactly, and we do have that tornado watch in effect right now. As we were mentioning, a really long period. It was issued earlier this morning just after daybreak ended, and will go until past our 6 p.m. newscast. And of course, we do have our hurricane special airing later on this evening, so make sure you're watching out for that. We'll also have links on our website as well. But as Craig mentioned, it's been just moving up, just ticking up just a bit. Now includes most of Southside Hampton Roads, and then the very southern tip of the eastern shore, and also the peninsula is now included in that level 2 risk. So we are going to have to watch out for the strong winds and those potential for spin-up tornadoes again as Dorian push up the coastline.
Okay, Rochelle, thank you for that. I want to just ask all of you really quickly, because a lot of the questions that we're getting on Facebook Live are very similar right now. It's, how is the storm going to impact my city, my hometown, my area? It's going to be hard to really pinpoint that, right? What's the best way to kind of keep up with how it's going to impact you specifically?
Yeah, so we created a set of graphics talking about regions, and everybody, you have to keep in mind, we love to answer every single individual question, but it's like trying to drink from a fire hose as opposed to a water fountain. There comes so many, it's hard to say, okay, this community, this community, this community, and those little changes are very subtle, or I should say subtle changes in location can have big impacts. So we'll talk about some of the different variations. I guess let's start with the south side, and we can actually load up some of those graphics if we can see the different impacts around the region. But we've been talking, first of all, coastal sections, Southside Hampton Roads. So, Tim, your thoughts on that? We were talking winds probably in the neighborhood of 35 to 50, 55 with higher gusts.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially as you get closer to the coastline. The wind's coming off the water. There's not as much friction there, so they'll be a little bit stronger. As you build back inland and away from the water, the center of where Dorian will track, you'll find the lesser winds, but the wind field overall is quite large. Tropical storm force winds at least through our entire area.
Yeah, and we're looking at 4 to 8 inches of rain. Again, this is the coastal areas of Southside. Now, I believe Rochelle has the inland areas for Hampton Roads, a graphic up. If we want to show that, the winds there a little bit lighter. Go ahead, Rochelle.
Yeah, we are going to be watching those winds, about 30 to 40 miles per hour, gusts up to 50 miles per hour. This is where we're going to see some of those weaker but still dangerous impacts across parts of our area. And again, this is for inland Hampton Roads. If we can take this graphic full, just so that we can see the information in case some of the text is a little bit small for you to watch. Maybe you're watching on a phone. So again, we're looking at inland Hampton Roads timing late Thursday into Friday. And guys, I'm just going to go through the rest of these graphics zone by zone so that you can know what is going to be happening with this. So coastal Hampton Roads, again, late Thursday into Friday. Those winds 40 to 55 miles per hour, gusts to 65, maybe even higher than that. Remember, we do have that tropical storm watch or warning, in effect for parts of Southside Hampton Roads. Rainfall 4 to 8 inches, locally higher in some of those areas. Tidal flooding expected to be major. We were talking about Sewell's Point, so that's one of the areas we're going to be watching as well. So moving down into northeastern North Carolina, this is our inland zones, winds 30 to 50 miles per hour, gusts to 70. When we're talking about that hurricane warning, those winds of 74 plus miles per hour, rainfall of 4 to 8 inches, locally higher. So we're looking at areas like Parkville, Elizabeth City, Weeksville. We're talking about those areas with inland northeastern North Carolina. Through the northern Outer Banks, Poplar Branch, Manio, Wanchese, Nags Head, KDH, Corolla, winds 40 to 60 miles per hour, those gusts to 80 miles per hour, locally higher rainfall, but as a rule, 5 to 10 inches expected. Tidal flooding also going to be major. And then moving into the southern Outer Banks, we're looking at those winds 50 to 80 miles per hour. These are the regions that are going to be closer to the center of Dorian, gusts potentially 90 plus miles per hour. Still with that rainfall 5 to 10 inches and tidal flooding major once again. And this impact is going to be significant for those areas in the southern Outer Banks that are going to be closer to the center of the circulation of Dorian, guys.
Puts it in perspective when you hear numbers like 90 plus talking about those gusts. I mean, it has potential to be really dangerous. Yeah.
Well, passing by Hatteras as a Category 2 hurricane, still very strong. I mean, it's very reasonable. And keep in mind, not everybody that is around that hurricane as it's coming through, we can show you the forecasted wind field as well, is going to experience that. That means that the maximum sustained wind somewhere in this hurricane is at that level when you see 100 or 110 or whatever going by. That's why these numbers that you see a little bit lower than what the official hurricane forecast is, but those gusts are going to be up there, we think, especially southern Outer Banks.
Yeah.
Michelle is asking us, do you think we will have flooding from the creeks like we did with Matthew? So when folks hear major hurricane, you know, they think immediately back to Matthew and what it was like in their neighborhood. So is there any kind of correlation we can expect?
We can, a lot different setup coming into this.
Yeah, when we went into Matthew, we already had a very saturated ground. We were 14 inches above where we should be. 2 weeks before Matthew came in, picked up 15 inches of rain in a week. Wow. So the ground was already primed and couldn't really absorb any more water, so there was nowhere for it to go. So I don't think we'll see it as intense as we had with Matthew. We have a much drier surface scenario that we're starting with. So that should be helping us out at least.
This is also a more progressive storm. And the other thing, I mean, it's going to keep going. You talk about the potential for the surge coming in and our, tidal flooding. We're looking at one really bad high tide cycle, and that comes tomorrow afternoon. So for Hampton Roads, specifically Sewell's Point for Norfolk, it's right around 4 o'clock. You can adjust your tide times based. If you live near the water in Yorktown, you know it's coming about a half an hour later. If you're at the beach, I think it's an hour and a half earlier. So adjust those tide times, but just know when we come through that, we can take a look at the graphic. There is major tidal flooding expected Friday afternoon, and that's for Norfolk. So if we reach 6-7, you keep in mind, historically, Isabel, which is the modern benchmark, that was at 7.89, just under 7.9 feet. So we should be about a foot and maybe 3 inches or so below what we saw with Isabel, a little bit lower than Irene. Irene was around 7.5 feet. So this is going to rank. This is something going into this when we were looking at levels around 6.5 or 6.4. Weather Service was terming as a once every 3 or 5 year type of flooding event. Obviously significant, but it doesn't last over several high tide cycles. It pretty much does its thing tomorrow. Then as the winds shift around, it should blow out.
And that's good, but I think this is a prime time to just remind people once again, I know we've been doing it all day, but remind them again to prepare for tomorrow. Yeah, I want to shout out really quickly Tracy Hawes Commons Little, who said, get your batteries, your candles, everything that you need for hurricane prep. charge your cell phones. Even though it's going to continue to move, it's important to get ready now before the storm gets here.
We have power outage maps, and even though, you know, we've been hit more directly with bigger storms like an Isabel, something like that, there will be people that lose power tomorrow. And we can take a look at the latest power outage index. I think Rochelle just pulled that up. Rochelle, you want to speak to those numbers there?
Yeah, so once again, we're watching areas a little bit farther to the south and east that are going to be closer to that center of Dorian as it moves by the southern Outer Banks, as the more numerous power outages that we are expecting as you move farther to the north and west through areas like Elizabeth City, Ahoskie. We might be seeing more scattered and then isolated as we move, especially areas farther west toward 95, 85, Emporia, Roanoke Rapids, up towards parts of Isle of Wight County, Surrey, and Sussex County, and also the peninsula and the eastern shore, more of those isolated. But everyone has the chance, but the better chance is going to come where we see those stronger winds coinciding with the center of Dorian.
We have a live pic from Charleston, South Carolina. If we could take a look at that, get an idea of what conditions are like there. Tim, you've been tracking this all morning, so what exactly are they dealing with in the Charleston area at this point?
They had some significant tidal flooding earlier. I saw a lot of pictures of the downtown area, I forget what they call it, the battle area. What do they call that? Something.
Yeah.
But over there, they had some significant flooding. Battery, that's what it is. The battery along the ocean there had some significant flooding. They had winds up and over 60 miles per hour in that area, too, as it's like crawling up the coastline. I don't know about you guys. I feel like we've been tracking Dorian forever, right?
Yeah.
So I look back, and when Dorian got its name, it was August 24th. Okay, so that would make it 13 days it's had a name so far. But that's nowhere even close to the longest one on record. You know what that one was?
What was that?
Hurricane John in '94. 31 days.
Are you serious?
31 days in the Pacific. Yeah, crazy long storm.
What's the average for a storm to be?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Probably less than what we're seeing now. Usually they develop and eventually they kind of meander, but it depends on where they develop too. This one came out of the main development region way out in the Atlantic, so had a long ways to go that it kind of maintained itself.
And it was hard to watch this because it was stalled over the Bahamas.
Right,
It was
and
just
that
adding
prolonged
insult to injury, and you hated to see that. It's just like, just move. And
Exactly.
finally, it was moving, but at 1 mile per hour.
1 mile per hour. I mean, yeah.
It's amazing how it was moving west and then it just slammed on the brakes and sat over Grand Bahama. And then finally, after the atmosphere kind of got itself together, started moving it north.
Let me ask you this. I was reading in the paper this morning a discussion. Apparently this happens every year when there's a Category 5. Should we add a Category 6? Sorry, this is a pet peeve.
No, it's
a sensitive subject.
Yeah, I do hear it a lot. I don't know, because this one got up to 185 miles. To be a Category 5, you need over 156. So we are well into that category. I don't think that changes the overall impacts, though. Yeah, you have a stronger Category 5, but will a Category 6 change people's minds? No, I don't think so.
Sure.
So
Yeah. So no.
maybe if storms continue to stay this strong, it'll be necessary, but you know, who knows? We've now had 4 years in a row that we've had a Cat 5.
We've had a Cat, right. Well, and then what's the criteria, just kind of like in general and quickly for, you know, the different categories? Because we hear, oh, it's a Category 1, 2, or 3, but how is that determined that now we've shifted into Category 3,
It's
Category 4?
based on what the aircraft, the recon aircraft that's flying through the storms find. So we'll get up to a Category 1 from 74 to 96.
Okay.
And then 96 to 111, you're going to get to a Cat 2.
11.
Anything over 111 to, I think, off the top of my head, I can't really remember what it goes up to on Cat 3. But then over 156 is a Cat 5.
Okay.
So typically pretty hard to get to a Cat 5, but
We've been
started with
seeing
Matthews, had 2 in 2017, 1 last year.
And on this note, let's send it over to Craig now, who has the scale up there.
Yeah, I just was pulling it up. You know, those numbers, once you get up in the 130s, before you start scratching your head a little bit, but no, up to 129 is that Category 3. Again, Category 3, major hurricane. So once we get over 110, and that's where this thing was, we were into that major category. So it dropped right now with winds of 110. Dorian's a Cat 2 hurricane, and it is forecast to pass our area at that strike. Now let's take the graphics full, because what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about what's happening with this thing, and we're going to go ahead and I'm going to walk over to the wall. I don't know if our directors can do this or not, but I'm going to try to walk in here and take a look. So we've got this center, and it's really been an interesting system. You know, it's been well handled by the models recently. Going into last week, it was looking like, you know, it might track across Florida and head into the Gulf and then turn north. Well, at some point it became, I think it was 5 days ago, something like that, it became pretty apparent that this thing was going to take a turn, and the models really lined up. It hasn't varied. That stall over the Bahamas was well advertised by the models. They've handled it, and right now this track very much in line with what the thinking has been. So I wanted to talk to you about what Charleston's going through. We just had that live picture, and I don't know if we still have that available or not, taking a look down around Charleston. And okay, we have Myrtle Beach. So let's go ahead and take a look at Myrtle Beach very quickly. And as we check things out, again, we had that Jeep that got into trouble there on the beach. Really a shame. That's a late model Jeep that is obviously in bad shape with water coming up and at times kind of the waves crashing over it. You get the water up into the engine and it's in trouble. The wave, the power of the surf moving that car around, and that car is no match for the surf, that's for sure. So that's a look at what's going on right there. But what I was hoping to show you is that we've got some of these heavier bands that are coming in. Once the winds shift around to the northwest, instead of having a surge pushing on, the water gets pushed away. So you're going to see a lot more beach on the backsides of this system as it passes. We're now watching these bands right here for those possible spin-up tornadoes. And I was just looking at these bands still about 159, 160 miles or so to our south and to the southwest. So these bands still a ways out, but as the system moves up the coast, we're going to see more of this energy coming up. That's why that tornado watch is in place, and we could see some warnings coming in a little bit later on. We've already had a bunch of warnings down here with some of these bands farther to the south. So lots to watch as this thing continues to move along. Center of circulation is offshore. It is making that turn now north-northeast, and that's significant. We should see more of a turn to the north-northeast and the northeast as we go. Folks in Beaufort are going to be watching this very carefully around Cape Lookout. We could have a landfall there potentially. It's going to move up very close to Buxton. Latest forecast track was showing it either right over the islands or maybe just a little bit on to the ocean side, depending on exactly where that falls, but very close to Buxton and Hatteras, and then accelerating off to the northeast. We're going to see the water building, and then as the winds shift around on the backside, we're going to be worried about that sound side flooding. So plenty to worry about as far as our weather conditions, and it looks like the worst of it will build through the late morning tomorrow and into the afternoon as we deal with all of that high water with the high tides and then that sound side flooding issue. So let me send it back over to the desk, and we'll hear some more from you guys.
Okay. I want to say really quickly, we were just looking at the Jeep, right? It's rough video to watch, quite frankly, but we were talking about this morning and then again this afternoon, this small amount of water that can have a substantial impact on your vehicle. So, you can't just get your home ready and your family ready. You probably need to move your cars too, just to be on the safe side, because we're mentioning, is it 1 foot or half a foot where it can start to lift the car up a little bit? Yeah. So just be careful, guys. We know that Norfolk and Portsmouth,
Virginia Beach opened up the garages.
And Virginia Beach, the garages are open.
Take advantage of that. They say just don't park in the reserve spaces, and you got to move your car by noon Saturday. At least that's the case in the Norfolk garages. But it's a great opportunity to get your car off higher ground. That way you can go to bed tonight with the peace of mind knowing at least your car is going to be okay.
That's right, and save a whole lot of money too. So that's a lot of damage.
Imagine explaining that to the insurance company.
Okay. Yeah, guys. All right. Well, we continue to track Dorian here. We have the radar up here as well. Continue to ask your questions here on Facebook Live too. A lot of the questions we know is, again, those specifics about certain areas. Rochelle and I were just talking about it, that a lot of folks just want to know, like, what's happening in Suffolk? When is it going to hit Gates County and that sort of thing? But again, just remind folks, you guys have certain graphics where people can go and check that when they need to find out exactly how their particular area is going to be impacted. And where can they go to get that information?
That'll be on our website. We're definitely we've been updating this live blog and this other story on our website, 13newsnow.com, throughout the past week. Even when Dorian was moving through the Caribbean, through the Bahamas, and when it was skirting right next to Florida, we've been updating this for multiple days with different images, tweets, Facebook graphics from our weather system. So a lot of information going there. We're updating it pretty much with every update from the National Hurricane Center as well.
Yeah, and I think yesterday evening when the storm did start to re-strengthen a little bit at the 11 o'clock advisory, when it did go back up to a Cat 3, people were kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? Is this thing re-strengthening? We talked about that happening because when it was sitting stalled over the Grand Bahama Island, it was doing something called upwelling, and it was bringing in some cooler waters from depth. So eventually it kind of cut itself off from maintaining a Category 5 strength, which is what it was when it moved in. But once it started moving again, it moved into warmer waters, and eventually it encountered the Gulf Stream, which is what happened yesterday.
Okay.
It had waters of like nearly 90 degrees, plenty of fuel, so it did start to take advantage of that and strengthen a little bit more.
Strengthen.
So we saw the satellite imagery showing a much more defined eye and not as rugged looking as it was, but then now it's starting to move its way off and starting to encounter some shear and a little bit of dry air, which is what we were expecting. Now it's starting to very, very slowly weaken.
Okay. Okay.
So-
Well, another thing I want to mention too. We talked about all of the crews that have been helping, coming from our area and trying to assist. I mean, certainly we talked about Task Force 2, Virginia Task Force 2, based here in Virginia Beach. We've talked about Mercy Chefs. I mean, the Red Cross. There's so many. I believe we have some information from one of our reporters.
Right, down in Elizabeth City right now. Adriana De Alba's down there, and she's with the U.S. Coast Guard, and they've just deployed 2 helicopters, you're looking at it right here, to Roanoke, Virginia. And so these search and rescue teams are basically going to be on standby, and they're going to be there for help for anybody who needs it. And of course, we talked about state of emergency. What does that mean when you go into a state of emergency? Well, really, it's to help you, and it's to give Commonwealth states, North Carolina, all the resources that they need should the worst happen in the case of a natural disaster.
Absolutely. We are continuing to monitor this Facebook Live and answer your questions. But for now, let's head back over to Craig. He, of course, is watching the track of Dorian. Craig, what do you have?
Yeah, and it's important to note again with the Coast Guard helicopters, they're pulling back to Roanoke to get those helicopters out of harm's way with the hurricane coming through. You take them out to Roanoke, and then you can bring them back as soon as that has passed, and then they're ready to deploy and do whatever they need to do. So, a lot of times the Navy will take the ships out and they will clear everything. This is what the military does to protect this expensive hardware that we depend so much on. Hurricane warnings, as you can see, in place for North Carolina, tropical storm warnings for Southeast Virginia, and we can see, again, the track on this. I'm going to break down the Futurecast, and we'll spend a little bit of time because there are so many specific questions. I'll try to get to some different points as we go along here. Here's the track, again, making that run to the northeast. Right now it's north-northeast. It should turn a little bit more to the northeast and pretty much parallel the coast. So it's kind of interesting. You see this and you're thinking, okay, what's next? It's going to accelerate off to the northeast. That's why this is really going to ramp up as we go through the overnight. There'll be some squally weather, but tomorrow it gets worse during the day, and then as it pulls away late afternoon and into the evening, eventually things will improve. But the tides are going to be an issue tomorrow afternoon, and then that sound side flooding, a big problem. So we'll get into our Futurecast, and this is what I want to show you. Again, some spotty showers, certainly a possibility as we take you through the afternoon tonight and into early tomorrow morning. Here it is, around midnight, some scattered showers, maybe a few squalls, a few cells producing some heavier, gustier winds. We'll have to watch for that. But the thrust of rain pushes northward as we go towards sunrise, and I expect to be very busy during daybreak. We'll be covering the heavy rain across certainly eastern North Carolina, and I believe all the way up through Hampton Roads and over towards the southern part of the eastern shore. Now, one of the big questions, and Tim and Rochelle, Jeff and Evan and I have been debating this, how far to the west will this rain expand? We're going to have to see. There was a thinking at one point with drier air coming in because there's this front that's helping to push this thing off. As some of this drier air came in, this system would maybe take on some extratropical characteristics and maybe expand. Well, it's not looking quite as much like that now, but we still have to watch and monitor because at some point out to the west, there's going to be a pretty sharp cutoff between very little rain and very heavy rain. So that's going to be one of the things we're really watching carefully tomorrow. You'll notice the wind's still coming in from the north and the northeast per this model. There's your center of circulation swinging off the coast. And then as we get into the afternoon, now you're looking at winds coming in from the north. Water's really pooling up southern part of the bay, and you start to get the concerns for the sound side flooding as the winds come around to the northwest. And here we go through the afternoon and evening, the potential there for those rises with the water. Manio, you think about places down around the Albemarle Sound. We'll be watching this very, very closely. The good news is it does continue to move away, and we will see big, big improvements. So as we get into the weekend, Saturday, we'll need that time to clean up a little bit. We're going to see what should be mostly to partly sunny skies with all the humidity from the rain that falls. there could be a pop-up shower, but it's going to be a very low risk at that. Typically, after the hurricane leaves, you think about that hurricane low pressure sucking up the air into it, right? All around the outside of that hurricane, you have sinking air, very stable conditions, and that's why it tends to be sunnier after a storm system passes, a tropical system, and it's usually a little hotter because that sinking air compresses, and it's obviously humid with all of this moisture that just fell. There's your cut line, at least with this model. This is the European model, so lighter amounts north and west, much heavier to the south and to the east. So we have some folks, I believe, down along, was it Folly Beach? All right, down in Charleston, taking advantage of the wave action. I got to tell you, incredibly dangerous to play in the surf here around Hampton Roads today. We've got that high threat of rip currents. Things will be getting worse here, but you can see down around Charleston on the backside that offshore wind kind of cleaning up the faces, and a lot of surfers trying to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Right. So yeah, we were talking about maybe staying out of the water right now. I mean, especially again as this moves up the coast, we want everybody to stay safe. We know it's fun to be out there at the beach and that sort of thing, but safety is the key, everybody. Safety is the key. We're continuing to watch this Facebook Live. I just want to say really quickly, a lot of the questions that we're now getting on Facebook Live, we're looking at the last maybe handful of them or so. They're similar to some of them earlier. So what we're realizing too is, some of you are just joining us, and so we may have to go back and just kind of reiterate some things that we've already discussed for you. We want to make sure your questions are answered. But Rochelle, you were talking specifically about, I can't remember who it was that asked, but someone asked about the Yorktown area. Marie Mulligan, thanks for joining us, talking about Yorktown and the Coleman Bridge.
Yeah.
You said you wanted to kind of specifically address the bridges.
Yeah, because we know that the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, they have their specific wind restriction levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, and such on. But we were trying to figure out, do the other bridge tunnels have specific restrictions? But we know that if those winds get high enough and we start to talk about the tides and some flooding maybe over some of those bridges, that we could be talking about some travel restrictions. Obviously, we don't want you guys to be out there when those winds are the worst and when we have the highest tides and things like that. But if you have to travel for some reason, whether you're an emergency responder, that's just something that we're going to have to plan ahead for and think about as well.
I'd love to share with you guys a little perspective on this as well. We're talking about the hurricane force winds, the tropical storm force winds, all this, and a lot of folks are thinking, okay, how bad is it going to be? All right. Keep in mind, when we've had tropical systems come through where we've just had tropical storm force winds, we've had tree limbs down, we've had power outages, power lines down, and even if it's not the worst storm that we've ever seen, with those different things to impede your travel, there are going to be issues. We know that we're very confident that there are going to be issues with the higher tides and the major flooding with the water levels through the afternoon tomorrow. But those trees and limbs, weak limbs coming down, that creates a bunch of issues as well.
Yeah. And it's good to see that every school that I could think of at least has gone ahead and said we are closed tomorrow.
Yep.
That's on our website right now, so you're not going to have the buses out there tomorrow morning. You're not going to have parents driving kids to school or kids driving themselves to school. And that's good to hear, because it sounds like in the morning could be a pretty dangerous time to be out on the roads anyway.
Yeah, it looks like the strongest winds will be mid to late morning, heaviest rain, same time of thing. And the wind's hanging on right through the afternoon, too. And once they shift direction, as Craig was talking about, you have a whole different area to worry about at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really important, too, that we stress this is a fluid situation. It's a developing situation. So what it looks like right now, it may look differently when, Tim, you're getting ready to do the 4 o'clock show, and you and Evan and Jeff are pouring over the data coming in for the 5 o'clock update. Tomorrow morning on 13 News Now Daybreak, we're going to need you to get up and take a look if you've got concerns for your area, because it may come down to, Rochelle, you taking a look and saying, hey, I'm identifying this band right here, or we're getting word of, higher wind gusts are developing or whatever. It's going to be a changeable kind of a nowcast situation to get you guys through when this actually comes through.
And we are going to be starting early tomorrow morning. Instead of 4:30, we're on at 4, and we're doing extended coverage through the morning. And of course, we'll be looking for your reports only if it's safe to do so. We don't want you guys going out there taking pictures and video and possibly putting yourself in danger. That's absolutely what we do not want.
We shared this feed with our Daybreakers, but if you are watching this right now and you don't know about the Daybreakers, our Facebook group. I'll get it out there. Yes, the brain is locking up, folks. You can go and request to join 13 News Now Daybreakers. It's a Facebook group, and you'll get some extra access to the show, and we'll be able to share some different thoughts and things. Lots of great pictures posted and updates from viewers like yourself that are members of the Daybreakers.
Yeah, and I know that, Dan, you're looking up something from one of our reporters.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly mention, too, before we go into this, make sure you guys stay on social media, too. When we're not on air, I mean, we are constantly posting, especially the meteorologists here. So if you really have questions or you want to go back and maybe even look at this Facebook Live once we're done with it, you can go back and probably get questions that if you joined us kind of in the middle of it and you missed something, we can go back and watch this, and you can get all of your questions answered for sure.
Yeah, so this is coming from Stephen Graves, who's down in the Outer Banks. He said with Dorian on the way up to Hatteras, locals are starting to take the threat seriously. He's posted this video at the gas station, and the owner there in Buxton says they guarantee flooding will happen. It's just a matter of how bad it gets. So you see, they're preparing the pumps and wrapping those up. And I wonder how busy some of these pumps have been the last few days. They issued those evacuation orders in Dare and Hyde. What was that? Would have been Tuesday, maybe even Monday when they first said get out. So folks have had plenty of time, and now it looks like they're just trying to protect the equipment.
I wonder if that even works.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Yeah, I've never seen that either. The water comes up from below, so if you're, I don't know, maybe it does.
Interesting. I know we were talking too about, some folks have decided to stay in place where those evacuation orders are. We just want to remind you that officials are saying if you need help, I mean, everyone is going to kind of be out and trying to do what they can, but if you decide to stay in place in an area where there's a mandatory evacuation order, you're just going to have to, unfortunately, wait, because at this point, all of these officials and emergency crews are scattered.
Yeah.
So we want you to be careful, guys. If you can get out, the storm is not here just yet. If you can get out and you're in a mandatory evacuation area, please leave, although I know in some areas they're not requiring the residents to necessarily leave. I believe that was one of the counties in North Carolina. So again, folks, just make sure you stay safe. Make sure that you stay with 13 News Now, and we'll give you the very latest. But for now, we do want to head back to Craig. Craig, I know you're monitoring something with the tide levels.
Yeah, we want to talk about the tide levels, and we're going to break down the region by region impacts. Lots of folks asking about it, and we've been on for a while, so some of you just now joining may have some questions. Good news with this system, and at this point, we always look for silver linings, right? We have one high tide cycle where we're anticipating major flooding issues, and that comes tomorrow afternoon for Sewell's Point. You'll hear us talk about Sewell's Point. Maybe if you're new to the area, maybe you're in the military and you come in and you're going, okay, this is my first hurricane. What are we looking at? This is the level that we always track for Norfolk. It's a great measuring point, and that's what we actually keep our historic records on, Sewell's Point. So we're expecting a level from the tide forecasters, National Weather Service. They're projecting about 6.7. That may be up a little bit or down from this. We still have some time for it to fluctuate, but that's what we're looking at. So as we go through the afternoon high tide, not a problem. We get some nuisance flooding, maybe a little minor flooding Friday morning with the high tide coming at 3:24, and then the major flooding. That's our big problem there. That's for Sewell's Point, and that will create issues downtown Norfolk, parts of the area. Not only those areas prone to flooding, but even areas that haven't seen water up with the tides in the last 3, maybe 4 or 5 years. You're going to have issues with water potentially, so know that this is a real thing. All right, as we look to Yorktown, you can see major flooding. Also a possibility, it's expected. It's right at the cusp at Yorktown, okay? 6.7 for Sewell's Point, Norfolk, a little bit above that. But relative to what they consider major flooding in Yorktown, you're right there, right at the edge for Friday afternoon. And then Duck Pier, we're looking at a good jump here above that major flooding level. So obviously more surge down there coming in. And then we got to worry about the sound side flooding on the backside of this during the afternoon. I wanted to bring Tim, if you can, come on in over here as well. I wanted to get your thoughts. We were talking so much about trying to pin down the little nuances of this whole thing as it's coming together, kind of region by region. And Rochelle ran through some of this stuff earlier, but I thought maybe we'd take a second because people are still coming into this to kind of revisit this. Obviously, you know, the timing, we're feeling pretty good late tonight and into Friday. That's when conditions are going to get worse.
Yeah, and the reason why we break it down is because the impacts of the threats are not uniform across our area. The geography is so different. We have the ocean, of course, to the east of us, rivers, tidal basins, things like that that alter the threats that you'll see. But here in inland Hampton Roads, 1 to 5 inches of rainfall. The reason why it's such a large spread is because there will be a very sharp cutoff northwest of the area. Some spots, as you get closer to Richmond, may see a couple downpours measuring up to half an inch or an inch. But as you go farther south and east, upwards of maybe 4 or 5 inches certainly possible in that moderate tidal flooding there, too.
It's a pretty big spread, but again, there's going to be areas that get a lot and areas that get next to nothing, depending on where that cut line is. And that's something that we will be tracking really all the way into the now tomorrow morning. So we'll be watching that. Moderate tidal flooding, I mean, you know, some of these areas, they don't deal as much with the tidal flooding that far up the rivers, but you know, it's just something that with the rainfall and those areas that are still impacted by the tides, there'll be a little bit of a rise there, we believe. So moderate impacts farther inland. You take it to the coast, different story, and we're talking Hampton Roads here.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been asking, please tell us what's going on with Matthews, Gloucester, and Poquoson areas. You guys are considered to be the coastal parts of Hampton Roads, so we are looking at major tidal flooding for you. Poquoson, notorious for a lot of that flooding to be a big issue in that area. So if you live in a low-lying area in Poquoson or Charles City or Matthews and Gloucester out there, make sure you prepare for this.
You know, as you mentioned Poquoson, I want to take folks back a little bit. And again, Isabel was a much, much more powerful system coming into Hampton Roads than what we anticipate with this. And the levels are going to be lower based on what all the models are suggesting. But this does, when you mention Poquoson, you talk about the susceptibility to the tidal flooding. Keep in mind, stay out of the floodwater if you can, okay? Because a lot of times there's contaminants. And I remember a big thing with Poquoson was the waters, you know, there was all these watermen there that had fuel tanks and oils and different things, and that water can get contaminated. The floodwater can be pretty nasty, so you don't want to mess with that. You obviously stay out of floodwater for safety concerns, but if you have any cuts, nicks, abrasions, whatever, you can get infected if you come into that dirty water.
Yeah, and I remember with Matthew 3 years ago, that was a big thing. We had to run a whole story on it that folks were letting their kids go out and swim in the waters, and if they had an open wound, they were getting infected. It was just nasty stuff.
You have to get tetanus shots. It's a mess, so you don't want to do that. Rainfall, generally 4 to 8 inches, and this, too, a little bit of a wild card. Probably the areas a little farther inland, maybe a little bit less, like to the west and to the north. But near the coast, we've got potentially a lot of rain.
Yeah, and the overall impact, moderate to high, especially out through Virginia Beach. I mean, we saw similar scenarios play out with Matthew and past systems that bring that onshore wind, and it gets quite nasty.
And speaking of the winds, again, near the coast, Hampton Roads, 40 to 55 mile per hour sustained winds, gusts 65 or maybe even a little higher than that, right near the water's edge, some of these locations. So we'll just need to see how everything plays out tomorrow.
Yeah, now if we go into northeastern North Carolina, the interior locations there, those gusts could get very close to hurricane force, which would be mid-70 range miles per hour. Especially, we saw some of the numbers out through Edenton and Elizabeth City surpassing that. So higher gusts are certainly a possibility, and a lot of rain there, too, in the moderate tidal flooding.
All right, and we're going to be watching that. Again, some of the areas around the Albemarle susceptible to the sound side flooding issues as those winds shift to the north. But we're really concerned northern Outer Banks. You think about Manio, you think about some of these communities, some of these properties on the sound side dealing with that wind tomorrow afternoon as it shifts around.
And certainly, too, the possibility, if you did stay in that area, of being cut off from trying to exit. If the winds get too high on some of these bridges, as we just talked about, or if there's too much of an overwash of NC-12, you could have some issues getting out if you need to. You know, it doesn't take much for a strong wind to knock out parts of that roadway.
Yeah, this is a situation, potentially major tidal flooding. We expect that, and the overall impact's going to be high there. Obviously, a lot of rain as well, 5 to 10 inches expected widespread. There could be some locally higher amounts. You head down to the southern Outer Banks, and here you go. Can you imagine with that eye tracking very close and right over, we believe, Hatteras and Buxton?
Yeah.
We're looking, as a matter of fact, we were looking at that graphic that showed the different wind strengths at different periods for duration, and it went tropical storm, hurricane, nothing, hurricane, tropical storm, and that nothing was
the center of Dorian.
The center, yeah, actually the eye passing over. So the model that was basing, you know, that was doing that had over Hatteras and around Buxton, that eye passing. So we'll see. Still could maybe be a little farther south or a little farther to the north, but we think it's going to be very close to this area, and it's going to bring these types of conditions.
And very likely that Hatteras will be cut off. There will be parts of that road that are completely washed out from some of these very strong winds and very rough surf, too. We've seen seas building. We saw the frying pan camera. They had a 20-foot swell come on through there at one point earlier today. So that's all headed in this direction here, and that's not going to be good.
It's interesting. I've got a buddy down in Salvo, and we may actually talk with him tomorrow. He's riding this thing out down there, and he was saying with the winds starting to pick up, the water was actually being pushed out away from his location a little bit. So he's going to be giving us some reports. He's a retired firefighter. He's been a part of Virginia Task Force 2, so he knows about safety and rescue, and he's got a plan down there. But he's going to be giving us some reports, and we'll be hearing how things are going down southern part of the Outer Banks. I said, buddy, be careful. I mean, this is rolling right over their area. So
yeah,
pretty crazy.
Yeah, 5 to 10 inches of rain possible there, too. I mean, just a big rain event along coastal areas in the Outer Banks, so overall impact significant. All
right, I know Ashley and Dan, you guys have been looking at some of the questions coming in. I'll send it back over to you guys.
Yeah, a lot of the questions that have come in, of course, we've talked a lot about, again, just want to reiterate, because some of them that are new that just came in are, again, talking about specific areas. Make sure you head to our website. We have the blog the meteorologists are keeping up with. Yeah. That's a great way to find out what exactly is happening, kind of hovering over your area. Craig, you were saying before, it's kind of hard to, pinpoint certain cities or certain counties and things like that for every weather update. But that information is available to you right now if you head to our website.
And while you're talking about this, I'm just going to take a second. And again, we thank everybody for joining us on this Facebook feed. We wanted to put this out there and just give you a chance to, kind of get a little more casual way to gather more information and answer some of your questions. But the group Tegna, our ownership group, we've got crews in from all around the country to help support us here, a fantastic digital team. We've got an entire backup facility that if something crazy were to happen and we were to have any issues with transmission here, we've got a fully operational backup facility that is at a very high elevation. It's a safe location. We'll be able to bring you all of the weather information that you'll need. You'll be able to get live shots. Everything will be like watching a normal newscast. The desk is a little small. Well, you have to stand maybe a little bit closer.
Right.
It's the old set we used to have.
It's the old set.
Yeah, it's a little bit tired.
Blast from the past.
But to have that this is something that we've been preparing months for, just to have everything ready, and they take it seriously.
We are all set tomorrow. I know there's a special tonight.
Yes.
And then we're starting early tomorrow. What can we expect from that special this evening?
Stuff, just in case you don't have everything kind of in its place, we're going to be talking about that, last minute preps, kind of what to expect from the storm. After the storm, we'll have some information on that. And again, that starts at 8 o'clock, goes for a couple of hours. And as you mentioned, Dan, we're going on early tomorrow, and we're doing extended coverage through the morning. We're starting at 4 a.m., going through 9, and then we're going to do something between 9 and 12, and then we'll be back again for 13 News Now at noon. But again, do want to reiterate that we'll be looking for your reports, so you can definitely send them to us through the Facebook group. You can send them to us on Twitter, just hashtag 13 News Now. We'll be checking that through the morning. We'll have digital teams in here as well, trying to get some of your reports up to help better tell that weather story as the Dorian is pushing close to our area, especially for our neighbors down into the southern Outer Banks.
So check this out. I'm on this astronaut's Twitter page. She's aboard the International Space Station. You could search at Astro_Christina, and she is giving us this incredible aerial view of Dorian from outer space.
And y'all know I love space.
I was getting ready to say, I remember earlier this week when we were talking about the team that flies into the eye,
the Hurricane
Hunters, and you were just talking about Rochelle a little bit earlier this week, just how fascinating that is, and that's how you all get your data about what's happening with these storms too. So that's basically what happens, is they kind of feed it back down from the helicopter that they're in. I mean, how does that?
They drop instruments.
How does that work?
I'm sorry. Apparently, we haven't had this conversation with Ashley. We'll get you up to speed.
No one told me.
All right, so they have Hurricane Hunter aircraft. Okay, they're not helicopters. Helicopters generally have a really tough time in hurricanes. So,
That's kind of what I thought, but I was like, well, maybe that's what it was.
I'm lovingly giving Ashley a little bit of trouble.
A little bit.
So they fly through the hurricane. They crisscross it several ways. They take measurements. They drop instrument clusters down through the hurricane that radios back information. So we get information on the structure of the hurricane throughout, and they take all of this, they put it into computers that produce models, and we get our forecast.
Imagine the turbulence. I can't even do turbulence on a flight from here to Charlotte.
But it looked really calm, though.
To Charlotte.
Once you break through
Once you
into the eye.
once you break through into the eye.
Yeah, and there's really, they have what they call a stadium effect, where you punch through when they actually penetrate the eye. They call it a penny, right? You penetrate through the eye and you get into it, and all of a sudden you go from this violent shaking where you can't see anything, you don't know up from down, to all of a sudden you break out and you can see the sun. You might see birds in the eye that get caught in the circulation that have to migrate with the storm. They just keep flying. Yeah, it's crazy. And they bank up and you can see the sun, and it looks like the inside of a stadium because the wall of the eye surrounds you.
Got it.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Very fascinating.
I want to send it over to Tim at the wall right now with that 1 o'clock advisory, too.
Well, yeah, I wanted to show you, too. This is actually one of the recon missions that you guys were talking about, a plane flying right through there. They're coming out of Biloxi, Mississippi, flying through the storm, the hurricane hunters. They've dropped some of those instrumentation into the storm, and they find the pressure in the wind. Recent past showed 81-mile-per-hour winds and a pressure that has come up from the latest advisory. This is at 9:58 at 1 o'clock. This one found a pressure of around 960. Of course, it'll change in different areas of the storm, but could give an indication that maybe it's starting to show a little bit of some weakening. But that doesn't really matter because the overall storm size has grown. The wind field has expanded. We see a north to south spread of the storm is over 550 miles. So it's a very, very large storm. Will continue to spread out as it interacts with that incoming front that's going to kind of expand the threats or the wind field and the impacts up and down the eastern seaboard in this particular area here. Here's the latest update here. It looks on satellite imagery. You can see that rugged-looking eye just off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, now off to the east of there. And it started that northeasterly projection at 8 miles per hour or so. Still high in Category 2. Category 3 is 111 or higher. On radar imagery, more of the same, just getting lashed in South Carolina, the Charleston area. Very heavy winds there still, but the winds are coming now out of the northwest, which is blowing all the waters out away from the Charleston area and the areas that have already seen some of that flooding. We talked about this too, but it seems to be a little bit of a growing threat with the tornado issue, or the severe weather threat from the Storm Prediction Center has issued tornado watches here right on through this evening. 2 separate areas, bring some tornado warnings that have already moved through the Wilmington area and actually caused some pretty significant damage there. Emerald Isle. Okay, let's go to that video now in Emerald Isle. You can see some of the damage from those tornadoes. I mean, it was a lot of times they are weaker, short-lived, but this one looks to have been very substantial, knocking out an entire neighborhood, flattening some of these homes there. I mean, that looks to be winds possibly over 130, 140 miles per hour. What would you say, Rochelle?
That kind of damage, you know, the complete devastation and destruction. That house is sideways, Tim. Like, definitely.
Yeah, blown off the foundation.
Yeah, that's wow.
Just can't let your guard down. You're preparing for a hurricane, but at the same time, you have to know that it's possible that you need to evacuate to a low level as well.
Yeah, that's why we tell people, you know, evacuate, because we do always have, most of the time, we have that chance for some tornadoes, and they're not always visible, especially we had that tornado watch and those tornado warnings out early this morning in South Carolina. You know, you have to have a way to have those alerts, especially when these storms are moving through overnight, something to wake you up so that you can, if you didn't evacuate or you weren't asked to evacuate, you can get to your safe spot. And we're always telling you, interior room, bathtub is usually pretty sturdy, lowest level. Get the kids helmets, not potatoes, excuse me, pillows. And those,
They need food, though.
they do need
They need okay, I'm just saying.
non-perishables, guys.
There you go, non-perishable. You know, and speaking of that, just want to remind everybody too that if you do have to leave home, you're trying to figure out where to go, we do have a list of all of the shelters that are opening today on our website. Just go to 13newsnow.com. You can find that information. It's separated between Virginia and North Carolina. One big thing to point out with this, though, not every shelter is allowing for pets, and that's a big thing. We know we got a lot of folks that watch that, you know, have cats and dogs and things like that. So just make sure that you check with the shelter before you head there to see if you can bring your dog or cat or your pet with you. We want to make sure that everybody stays safe during this time.
The resources are out there to ensure there is no loss of life.
That's right.
Here in Hampton Roads.
That's absolutely right. All right, well, let's see if we can send it back to Tim now. I know, Tim, you were talking and we kind of, you know, got off a little bit subject here, but we want to make sure we send it back to Tim now for the latest on the track.
I think Craig's pulling up something over there. Craig, were you looking at the the rest of the Atlantic?
So we were looking at that, and we're going to focus on Dorian, but I did want to just take a peek, Tim. That's one of those things that we were talking about earlier. You were measuring out the size of the hurricane and Dorian, and this is our threat right now. But we were looking out across the Atlantic, another wave coming off the African coast. Kind of interesting there. Also, look at how close the eye is getting to the coast of South Carolina. That's kind of interesting as well. It really is pretty close. As we're looking there, it's not far from Charleston. They now have that offshore flow, and with the winds coming offshore there, you're going to see the tides pushing away. So they were dealing with a lot earlier as far as the storm surge, and now with the winds pushing offshore on the backside of this system, you can see that the tide levels would be dropping there. And that's what we were looking at with some people out actually trying to get out into the surf around that. Myrtle Beach still dealing with some of these squalls, and then this line out here still south of Jacksonville. But we're seeing more and more of this. And as we go through the afternoon, we're going to find chances for showers and a few storms down to the south. Eventually, that rain is going to spread northward as the center gets closer to us. So plenty to watch right there. Do we want to talk about the rest of the Atlantic? I mean, I guess we can, because it is certainly interesting as I expand the view here. We had the one system, Fernand, come into Mexico, a rainmaker more than anything, a couple of tropical systems monitoring over on the Pacific side. But we've got this wave coming off the African coast that, again, will bear watching. Guess maybe potentially Umberto. What do you think about that, Tim?
Yeah, I think it's a real possibility. And these are something that we call low riders. They're very low latitude, so they tend to move a little bit farther to the west. Less chances of it kind of doing that loop out to sea and being called a fish storm. So that one certainly bears some watching here. And that could certainly, I know, Craig, we were looking at some of the models earlier, pointing that thing pretty much along that track that you were showing, eventually ending up in the Caribbean by the middle of the month.
We'll see. It's a ways out there, and a lot of things happen. By the way, this swirl out here, that's Gabrielle, or what's left of Gabrielle, kind of moving along there. So we're keeping an eye to all of this, another cluster of storms. It's just that time of year. I mean, we are just a few days, 5 days away from the peak of the hurricane season. Go ahead.
Yeah, is it still accurate to say that the projection is that this is going to be an above average year for hurricanes?
You know, Tim, do you want to speak to that? Because it was kind of going back and forth. You know, once, we were looking at the conditions changing globally with the sea surface temperatures. You know, we were talking about La Nina versus El Nino. Now it's kind of come back, neutral or to light?
El Nino is neutral. Yeah, there's nothing going on out there.
La Nada?
Yeah, La Nada, pretty much. But overall, I mean, this is just one storm right now. Right, so that doesn't mean that the season overall has been active. There's also something that we go on called ACE points, accumulated cyclone energy, and this storm has actually helped us go above average in the season just because of the amount that it has accumulated over the past week that it's been around. In fact, it's been around for 13 days right now. But we do have the other storms that are firing on up out there, and overall the names, we've gone through 6 or 7 so far, I believe. Right, Craig? We're up to 7?
Yeah.
So 7 named storms, and they were calling for 11 to 15 overall, so we could certainly get there by the end of the season, especially within the next week, that the activity will be kicking on up as we approach the climatological peak, which is September 10th, September 11th, that we see the most potential. The conditions are absolutely perfect for storms to develop.
You know, we're watching the eye here, and again, it's pretty close to the coast there of South Carolina. It could potentially come up and clip Cape Fear, Cape Lookout. We're looking at that. And then, again, Hatteras. So as it takes this motion off to the north-northeast, and I'm just kind of doing this freehand on the map here with the mouse, if it kind of takes this, we could actually have 2 or maybe 3 landfalls, depending on exactly where this thing is. So this is one of those deals where we're watching it. The models are in very good agreement that it's going to move up in this general direction. And the impacts that we see here are pretty much, I mean, they're looking more and more definitive that this is going to be an issue. However, it could still turn a little bit farther to the east, a little earlier, and maybe stay south of our area a little bit. That would give us a bit of a break from some of the numbers we've been looking at. If it were to track farther north, and that's what it was starting to look like a little bit late last night, but it has since kind of, settled in at this area. But if it were to track a little farther to the north, the conditions, could be a little bit worse. So this is just one of those things where I'm not telling you this to drive ratings. I'm telling you this because legitimately, for those that are vulnerable to all of these impacts that we've been talking about, and that includes just about everybody in our viewing area, it's important that you stay up on the very latest. It will be changing.
Absolutely. This is a good time to remind folks, as we're talking about those that have had to evacuate, they're under the mandatory orders. We don't have those. They're just for North Carolina at this point, some areas of North Carolina. However, it's a good reminder to know your evacuation zone. Sure. We were talking about that because again, once you're under that evacuation order, you need to already have this information in your head. So we have that on 13newsnow.com. The Virginia Department of Emergency Management, they kind of rely on that to group people based on your address, based on the nature of the event. So if you know, well, I'm in evacuation zone A, then you don't have to go and do all of this research when it's happening.
All online. Right? It's very easy to find. You just type in your address. And Portsmouth, they're calling for voluntary evacuations.
Voluntary,
Zone A.
Yes, voluntary evacuations, Portsmouth for Zone A. So again, if you already have this information, you've looked it up, you know it in the back of your mind, you don't have to then kind of scramble at the last minute. You know it's time to move out of the area. So we just want to remind folks, if you can't say it right off the top of your head, go to 13newsnow.com, find the Know Your Zone information, and you can very easily find out per your address exactly what your evacuation zone is.
Just getting some new information into our email from the National Guard. They have staged approximately 60 soldiers and 20 vehicles for state emergency support in the Eastern Shore and Hampton Roads area alone. Okay. So that's quite a lot. 60 soldiers, 20 vehicles. They're here on standby, ready to help as needed. They have their Humvees out. They also have 2 rotary wing aviation rescue hoist crews on standby. And of course, this is for a worst case scenario should rescues be possible. But Rochelle, this is why they say get out when these mandatory evacuations go in, so that you don't put these first responders' lives at risk.
Exactly. Like we just saw that we had to have the helicopters flying out of North Carolina to Roanoke just in case they need to come back, whether it's North Carolina or to Virginia. So I am going to tell everybody, share this with your friends on Facebook that live in the area, that might live into North Carolina, also into South Carolina as well. Tag them in the comments so that they can know what's going on. We're getting these updates in every hour now from the National Hurricane Center. And with the 2 p.m. advisory, those winds are still at 110 miles per hour. So a high-end Category 2 storm, but it has weakened. But that doesn't mean we're in the clear by any means at all. We have hurricane warnings in effect, tropical storm warnings, storm surge warnings, flash flood watches. So we have a lot to continue to watch from now toward the end of the day, tomorrow, and heading into the weekend as well.
And that's why the preparation is just so key, to just get ahead of everything and just be ready when any impacts are felt here from any hurricane. If you already have everything lined up, then you don't have to be concerned when we start to see the rain and the wind. So let's make our way over back to Tim, back into the Weather Center, and kind of get the latest on the track there with Tim.
Yeah, I want to go back and look at Dorian's history, because we had talked about some landfalls, potentially Cape Lookout, Cape Hatteras, 2 additional, but there's already actually been 4 landfalls. It started when this was just a tropical depression, borderline tropical storm, when it made landfall in St. Lucia. Then it traveled up to the U.S. Virgin Islands, made landfall over St. Thomas. And then, as you know, the impacts with the Abaco Islands and Grand Bahama in the northern end of the Bahamas here as a Category 5 storm. So as it headed north, no land interaction and still none, but potentially landfall in Category 2 or Category 1. In fact, the last time, if it was still a Category 3, which it's still on the borderline of, the last Category 3 storm to make landfall in North Carolina was Fran, and I think that was back in 1996 or 94. I got to look at the exact numbers, but it's been about a quarter century since a major hurricane has made landfall in North Carolina. You may be thinking, well, Florence was a Category 1 when it made landfall last year along the coast of near Wilmington and over near Atlantic Beach. So it's Category 2 right now. Potential landfalls, Cape Lookout, Cape Fear, maybe even if it gets a little bit closer to the coastline, and Cape Hatteras. So I think I actually posted a question about what was the storm that had the most landfalls. And I posted it on Weather Twitter because I had no idea and nowhere to find it. But somebody responded with Irene with 9 landfalls.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'd have to go
if that's
back.
true or not, we'll see. Yeah.
So I just heard from my buddy down in Selma.
Yeah, we're wondering how he's doing.
Yeah.
So he's good down there. I mean, he was just telling me that the winds are really starting to pick up down around Hatteras. And again, not even close to tropical storm force, but he said, for the longest time this morning was pretty pleasant down there.
Okay.
And he said all of a sudden now the winds are gusting up over 30 miles per hour. He'd say, the winds are picking up. And he said the sand's really blowing around. So he said it's kind of like a sand blaster, which is one of those things. If you've been out there during any of the storms. I remember when I was out covering what turned out to be Superstorm Sandy. I was out right there at the jetty, and just the sand. I mean, it comes down and it literally stings, when you get those types of winds and it's blowing across the beach. So conditions are going to get much, much worse down around Hatteras Island.
He's riding it out in Salvo. Why did he decide to stay?
Well, they have the property down there. Again, he's a first responder. He's actually going to be on standby to help out down there with their volunteer rescue squads if they, if there's something they need to move equipment and do some different things. He actually has quite a bit of training. There's another retired firefighter that's also staying down there. They're in touch. They kind of got a little network where they're at least keeping tabs on each other. But he said this morning, folks heeded this. They took off mostly.
Okay.
Folks have gotten out.
That is good.
So there's not a lot of folks hanging them back now.
So we're looking right now at some video there, the Virginia Beach oceanfront. That's our DQ camera. And you see the rain is coming. And, Tim was just saying that this is Dorian-related rain that just started to make its way there at the oceanfront. So we're starting to kind of see those effects. You can see the gray skies for sure. Looks like some folks are still down there. This would be the time to go ahead and make your way to a safe location, folks. I mean, again, I know that everyone wants to just enjoy this. They want to be out there and that sort of thing, but officials are advising against it. Stay out of the water, get off the beach, because as soon as these effects really start to move in, it's going to be an issue down there for sure.
All right, and Tim's watching the radar right now.
Yeah, here's a look at the latest radar loop over the last 45 minutes. That little shower moving out from the ocean front, coming in out of the southeast, lifting off to the north and west on the way outer fringes of the overall circulation with Dorian. And we have to go way far to the south through the Outer Banks to see any much more of these, but they are building to the north and west and will eventually be moving into our area here. So scattered showers possible for the rest of the afternoon, and then becoming much more widespread as the overall, central circulation, the heavier bands well to the south near Morehead City, Jacksonville, Wilmington now lift their way northeastwards and track along the coastline there. So overall, just some scattered showers here, guys, in the short term. So we'll watch that closely here. With those heavier bands, though, we saw the same kind of scenario with Florence moving on in. That actually made landfall over in this area here, though, out through the Wilmington area. We're seeing the banding coming in up off the ocean here, bringing in those very heavy bands. And a lot of those do actually bring some spin within them. And that's why we also have that tornado watch that's up for that area, too. In fact, if I throw it on there, you see that pink shading or that purple. That is that tornado watch. That's up for a while, a 12-hour watch advisory box there on that until 7 o'clock this evening for some of these through the Jacksonville, Morehead City area to spawn some more tornadoes. We've already actually seen a few today as they moved through earlier this morning along that same band.
I was just seeing on Twitter that Dominion Energy is getting ready. They had the power crews on standby. We know tomorrow is going to be a busy day for them. And Tim, I haven't seen this before, the power outage index.
Yeah.
Is this something new? How does this work exactly? Does it predict?
It's like it's like a predictor. It goes off of the strongest of the winds and the potential for the most amount of rain and puts it together and says, possibility that we see some pretty high scenarios that we could see some power outages there. Let me try to pull it up because that's on a different computer. We can't really see it on here. But
well, it's
overall,
interesting. It shows that there could be numerous outages, especially in some of the Outer Banks areas and in the Virginia Beach, Pungo regions, and then scattered power outages possible in some different parts of Hampton Roads.
Yeah, and as I load it here, there you go. You can see some of those numbers there. Numerous power outages possible in northeastern North Carolina and southeastern parts of Virginia, with the strongest winds being in those locations. So.
And you always say you can always watch on the app, and of course, weather radio is always good to have on standby.
Yeah, because the power outages, you want to have an alternative way to get your information. So there's plenty out there, which is good.
Okay, I know you're flipping forth between computers. We are looking at still winds sustained of 110 miles per hour with Dorian right now.
Yep, that's the latest advisory around there coming out at 2 o'clock. Should be updating right now. In fact, it'll show up here in just a second. Yeah, still at 110, so no real changes overall. Pressure's still the same, movement's still the same too. So the hourly advisories come out because it is so close to land.
Yeah, and then when it just decimated the Bahamas, it was at gust even of 200 plus.
Yeah, sustained of 185. and that's where it peaked. So can you just imagine that kind of wind? It's unfathomable. And for hours, that's like an EF4 tornado, but not for a couple minutes like a tornado would be. It was like for 12 to 18 hours.
And then what allowed for the hurricane to become a strong Category 5 to what it is now?
Right. So when it moved into the Bahamas area, just off the coast there, the conditions were absolutely ideal. We had low wind shear, very moist environment, sea surface temperatures were warm, and we knew that with that going in there, that was like a seed, planting a seed in a very fertile ground.
Yeah.
We knew it would explode. We didn't think it would get as strong as fast. It underwent rapid intensification, which it dropped its winds, or upped its winds 35 miles per hour within 12 to 24 hours. And that happened. In fact, a little bit more so than that, increased 45. So it's just been crazy to see that thing just overall look like a textbook scenario storm through the Bahamas.
Yeah, and our thoughts still go out to them. All right, Craig standing by.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the steering currents, Tim. We talked so much about this. We had it kind of pinned between two areas of high pressure, and the one that was pushing it along weakened, and it just kind of sat there. We kept waiting for it to kick, to move, to do something. Now we've got this trough that's digging over the eastern U.S., and that's helping to kind of steer it north and now to the northeast, Rochelle. So we're actually seeing the influence of that trough here in the U.S. starting to move this a bit.
Yeah, and a trough is an area of low pressure, and hurricanes are an area of low pressure. So this one is coming out from the northwest. It's going to kind of swoop through and kind of inch Dorian away from the coastline as we move over the next couple of days. It is still going to shoot off to the north and east. Actually, they have a tropical storm watch as far north as Cape Cod in Massachusetts. Wow. And Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are under a tropical storm watch. So they're not going to get that direct impact, but they could get those tropical storm force winds up there too.
As we continue to talk about this, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Craig, I just want to quickly say, because I know we're on Facebook, our Twitter feed also is fantastic in terms of keeping up with all of our reporters that are in the field right now. One of our reporters, Adriana Dalba, just tweeting about some more information in terms of the mandatory evacuation orders that were out there for Pasquotank, Camden, and Elizabeth City. If you just go to 13 News now, because our official account is retweeting all of the reporters, it's a one-stop shop for you. So I know we're giving a lot of information right now. That's a great way to keep up with everybody who is in studio, in the newsroom, and in the field.
And we'll also mention right now, this is just a Facebook Live discussion. So when we're actually into the show tomorrow, we've got a whole plan that's set up. We've got reporters. We've got a very structured show. And, of course, the ability to switch on the fly as news starts to break during the show. But right now, we're saying, hey, let's talk about this. Or, hey, that's an interesting point that Dan or Tim or Rochelle brings up, and we talk a little bit more about that. Looking at this, you know, and you're seeing we have some folks that are actually bringing us some water and some
refreshments.
Yeah, it's amazing what a chicken nugget will do to give you some more energy.
Speaking of the chicken nuggets.
Wow.
Dan Kennedy.
Hey.
There goes Kennedy. All right, so what we're looking at is funny. I was out, ran out and grabbed a few things from one of the local grocery stores, and you can come back in here.
I mean, you don't. You can if you want to.
Are we
thought
just...
we were sending them away.
Is that
you know,
what we're doing?
Go ahead. We're working up. Yes.
Oh, that one's bigger than I thought it was going to be.
I will say that the stores were really.
Sorry.
Was the water flying off the shelf?
Yeah, she's really got that focus
I need
going.
to replenish my carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, everybody. Just please excuse me. It's going to be a long day tomorrow.
So anyway, the grocery store, really busy. The lines weren't crazy. There were no shortages that I saw in the stores that I was looking at in Norfolk, but there are a lot of folks that are out actually thinking about getting these things, and you saw a lot of water going out to the parking lots. Good time to make sure your cell phones, your laptops, whatever electronic devices you have, just get them charged up before tonight. Again, we don't anticipate the worst of the weather until tomorrow, but we do need folks to get ready as conditions are going to deteriorate late tonight and tomorrow.
This is Virginia Beach right now giving an update on storm preparations. Let's see if we can listen in for a little bit.
Difficult than it will already be. Please take this storm seriously. As I said before, the increased impacts are going to be, the potential is going to be there. Hopefully, you know, as we all know, the predictability of these storms are hard to nail down. We just want to make sure we're prepared for the worst, and you are fully prepared. We would like you to utilize our city website, vbgov.com. There'll be a host of information on that website that you can access that will help you be better prepared for this storm. I'm going to turn it over now at this time to Erin Sutton, our emergency management coordinator. She's going to talk to you briefly some more about the weather impacts and some of the preparations that we've been doing. Aaron?
So just to let folks know, some key weather points that you need to be aware of. We're looking at sustained tropical storm force winds starting about 3 a.m. Friday and ending 5 p.m. Friday. The peak of the storm is expected to be between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. on Friday. Wind gusts, we could see wind gusts approaching 90 miles per hour. We are expecting 6 to 8 inches of rain with the possibility of 10 to 12 inches in isolated areas. Our high tide is expected to be between 2 and 3 p.m. That will be at the height of the strongest winds and heaviest rains and storm surge. We're looking at 4 to 6 feet of storm surge on top of 10 to 15 feet seas. And if you've seen of late, the tornado activity with this storm has increased significantly and is another area that we need to keep an eye on. So please heed these warnings. It's extremely important that you be vigilant, stay informed, and be prepared. We are expecting power outages as well that could cause significant issues for those folks if they do decide to get out on the road. With that, I stress to stay off the roads if at all possible. Storm conditions will make this extremely hazardous. Do not attempt to drive through floodwaters. Avoid walking through flooded areas, even if it's shallow. Standing water generated by a storm could contain things that are harmful to your health. Avoid downed power lines. We are expecting significant power outages. Secure items. Please make sure that you are securing the items surrounding your house. Make sure you're taking extra care to check in on your neighbors, the elderly, the young, and any of the infirmed as well. Please make sure that you are staying informed. Again, the shelter information, you can, the shelters were open at 6 p.m. at Kellam and Brickell Academy. Also, the mandatory evacuation for Sandbridge will go into effect at 6 p.m. this evening. Finally, I do want to mention that if you have storm pictures, we are going to identify storm pics at vbgov.com. We'll put that address on our website, but it always will help. It always helps us to keep up on what we're seeing throughout these storms and improving our response. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Leahy.
So we can, we'll entertain some question and answers, and I'll have a few closing comments.
Let me ask Mr. Leahy, can you go over again the evacuation for Sandbridge, the time?
Sandbridge is we're implementing a mandatory evacuation effective 6 o'clock tonight.
And it was voluntary for Zone A, and were there any less?
It's voluntary for Zone A with a special emphasis on any of the low-lying properties in Zone A, and then any other areas of our city that have traditionally encountered flooding during nor'easter events or tropical storms with strong nor'east winds.
Has the city adopted any sort of policy with regard to rescues? Are you going to get to a point, if there is a lot of flooding and so forth, where rescues might be suspended for the safety of city crews?
No, turn that over to Chief Hutchinson.
Yeah, Dave Hutchison with the fire department. You know, we have a saying that we've said for a long time, it's risk a lot to save a lot. So to say we're going to turn something off, I don't think that'd be the right way I'd look at it. We're going to stay as long as we can and do as much good as we can. So there's no real decision. We can't put aerials up when the wind gets up real high for fires, but short of that, we've got marine teams, the rigid inflatable boats, the hard sides with EMS and police. So we've got multiple units that can go in and get them, high water vehicles. So we're pretty well prepared.
Okay, well, thank you. So I would close by reminding all of your watchers and readers that they can call 311 by landline or 757-385-3111 by cell phone to get information about city services. Of course, for anything that is serious, threatening situations, emergencies, 911 for those situations. They can stay informed by tuning into our city TV channel, VBTV, on Cox Cable 46, 47, and 48, or Verizon Fios Cable 45, 46, and 47. They can also monitor our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have a brand new VB alert system out that has just been implemented, and our citizens can stay informed on a lot of details on this storm if they will register to be a user at VB Alert, which they
There you go. The big information coming down there is mandatory evacuations effective 6 o'clock tonight for Sandbridge.
Yeah, and you know, a couple of the safety things they were mentioning, you know, they were talking about preps around your home. Came to mind, be very, very careful. A lot of folks go out and get generators when these things are coming in. Make sure that it's properly ventilated. Read all of the instructions if it's a new thing. There are, across the country and across the region, people that get hurt improperly using them. You can risk, you know, harm to the linemen that are out there restoring power if you backfeed, if there's some different things going on. So just make sure you know what you're doing as you prepare to deal with this. And there is a good chance that we're going to deal with some power outages tomorrow. They just mentioned it in that presser. And I was thinking about that. You know, folks really need to know we could deal with some significant inconveniences tomorrow.
Absolutely. We're about to wrap up this Facebook Live, but Rochelle, Tim, anything else that you just wanted to share with folks? I know we're going to have coverage all day long.
As course is the same. Still looking at the heaviest winds, strongest rains. Strongest winds, heaviest rains.
It's fine.
Late tonight through tomorrow.
Okay, late tonight through tomorrow.
And real quick, I got to pass this along. We just got into our email that VDOT has no plans to close bridges or tunnels in Hampton Roads. That includes the HRBT and the Monitor Merrimack. Of course, they say if that changes, they'll let us know and we'll pass that along. But for now, no plans to.
But certainly watch the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, though, because that will be, heavily restricted if the winds are really high. So it looks like the rest of the bridges and tunnels should be okay. But we'll keep you posted certainly tomorrow about the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel for sure. All right. Well, we are going to certainly keep this Facebook Live up. Again, if you want to watch it again, you certainly can. Once we end this, you can watch it all the way through. A lot of information there. Hurricane special tonight, and we start at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. So make sure you join us for that.
And we will be in a little earlier in the morning as well. The show actually starts at 4, but if things start rocking earlier than that, be sure and tune into 13 News. We will have cut-ins and be able to cover it even before that 4 o'clock start as needed. So just stay tuned and stay safe.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's go back to the radar now for the next couple of minutes or so, just to show you again how the system is tracking. Our team of the most trusted meteorologists watching Hurricane Dorian as it moves up the coast. Again, we're going to have the very latest for you on 13 News Now throughout the day. And again, we're going to start at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning on 13 News Now Daybreak. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Stay safe out there.